Welcome back, I'm Captain Xavier, and as the title would suggest, and as I've hinted, and then no doubt many of you have already figured out, I am in fact building a ship of the line. This is going to be a full third-rate, 72 at least, gunship, and it is going to be huge and fantastic. As you can see, I've already built the hull. It started out, I was just going to shape it out, figure out exactly how I wanted it to look, and then I got carried away and built the hull. Now, to give you an idea of the scale, first of all, Lego banana for scale, but for a more useful scale, this is the size of the hull of my 44 gun frigate, the big one that you saw in the previous videos. That is how big the hull of it is, and then you look at that. Yeah, it's really very, very big and fantastic. I could quite certainly get more guns in it if I went with put the guns closer together, but I decided not to. We'll see how that works out once I actually, really start getting it built up, and we'll see how much bigger it is than the frigate. If I feel it's out of scale with the rest of the fleet, I may make it smaller or up it to a second rate. We'll see. I don't know yet, but I think it's going to be a decent scale. Ships of the line are huge and ridiculous. And fantastic. So, a couple of the basic things on the hull. It is solid. There is a lot of brick involved. It's not all as solid as this, but the bottom layer is brown, so I mean it looks like a regular hull. As you have no doubt noticed, it does come apart. This one is obviously not quite as dense, but it is still very, very solid, and I really, really like that. I wanted this to be very solid. I've looked at a lot of other people's ship of the line designs, and some of them are definitely more detailed and have better lines and curves than mine is likely to have, but a lot of theirs also looked kind of fragile, or the interiors weren't as detailed as I would like in order to support the slanted designs that they'd gone with, or the slopes or whatever. The interior design suffered. Now, it's not entirely true. Things like there's a full-scale HMS Victory, which is a first-rate ship of the line that is way bigger than I want to try to tackle. But I wanted mine to be very solid, but also, as you noticed, it comes apart, and that was another thing that I wanted to do for transport, and so that you can see the cross-section of what it looks like underneath, because I do want to have full interior detail, like I've done with my castle. It also was the easiest way to taper the hull. So it tapers as it goes backwards, and of course it tapers as it goes forward, and in order to get it much more gradual and fluid and not blocky by having an entire brick stagger, I wanted to go with a half a brick, and to achieve that I used Technic pegs, or Technic beams. The old Technic beams, most Technic beams, the holes do not line up with the studs above. They are offset by half a brick, or half a stud. But the more recent ones, they came out with ones that do line up. And if you line up one that's offset with one that's not offset, you end up with an offset stagger. And so that is how I have done that. And I'm really quite pleased with the result, both in the ability to pop it apart as well as how well it made everything stagger while still being very, very solid. I didn't end up using things like jumper plates, which are not exactly solid. I used jumper plates in the frigate, but I was still able to make that fairly solid. And the techniques that I used there will end up getting used probably on these once I get to the upper decks and I want to actually connect those. So where the ship comes apart, they won't be connected, but it staggers in several other places. And so I'll probably end up using jumper plates there to have support beams that go the full length and connect everything so that it doesn't pop apart and is solid. I will have to do a lot of research on what the lower decks are supposed to look like. I'm pretty sure these grates aren't actually going to end up being there, though they might. We will see how things end up playing out. Obviously, the places that are going to be the most complicated are going to be the bow, where it, tapers both forward and up, and that's a lot more complicated. The back end won't be as complicated because Ships of the Line, the back end was fairly straightforward. Really, I have a little bit of taper that goes on back here, but then once you get up to here, it's all actually fairly blocky and angular, but where it meets the rest of the hull is going to be the part where it'll be a little bit more interesting. And then the top deck is going to be the most fun to design and figure out how I want to do that. And again, that will require a lot of research. The ship that I am basing this off is the HMS Ajax. So this is an Ajax class ship. That's more or less how the guns are being set up, more or less how the deck and all of that is vaguely based on that, with, artistic license, of course. Yeah. The next things that I'm currently waiting on parts. A fair number of parts have arrived. Unfortunately, not the crucial ones I need to continue the next build. I mean, I knew there was a lot of... I knew how I was going to do the sides because I did, in fact, build a mock-up cross-section of how the decks are going to look. And I am using, as you can see, the sloped bricks rather than using plates that have been put on, because I feel it's a more elegant and clean solution, as well as being much more solid. This is a rock, and I really, really like that. But these parts right here represent the entirety of the parts that I had in those colors in my collection. Luckily, it turned out they're not actually rare and expensive parts. I just didn't have very many of them for whatever reason. So I ordered them in bulk, and those parts have not arrived yet. The other thing that I needed more of were the ribbing that I have in here, because I am having full actual, planking and framing and ribbing and all of that. And again, this doesn't represent all of it, but I definitely didn't have enough. And those parts have not arrived. The deck material has arrived, and a lot of other important parts have arrived. But these arches for this first deck and these slopes have not arrived. They should hopefully be here. Well, they'll be here by the time this video goes out, almost certainly. But yeah, that is how it is going to look. This will be a section basically right about there on the ship. It will then go up in the front a little bit, and it'll definitely slope up in the back a fair amount. So it'll have 2 full gun decks with 28 guns per deck, and then there are stern chasers, there'll be bow chasers, there'll be a smaller section of gun deck on top, not a full gun deck, which is why it's second rate, or third rate and not a second rate. And then there will just be copious amounts of detailing. I want, a full galley in here somewhere, possibly a brig in here somewhere, hammocks for the soldiers, all the gun decks, all of the cannon, supplies, the captain's quarters, all of that will be in here. And it's going to be a lot of fun doing all of that detail. It's going to be complicated doing that detail with this solid of a design, because this isn't designed to for the decks to easily come off. But not impossible. It'll be something that once I've built it, it will stay in whatever configuration I put it in. But yeah, that is the plan. The next part that I'm tinkering with, I do have some of the parts to do the parts of the ribbing. This is about as much of it as I can currently do with the parts that I have. But it will be fully, properly, all of the ribbing that the ship would have in the places that it would have it. There will then be a very grand gallery in the back. 2 full cabins for officers. One will probably be a dining hall. The others will be the captain's actual quarters. Yeah. It's going to be good. So stay tuned. There will be more. Unfortunately, I've gotten kind of as far as I can go with the parts I have. I am going to do a little bit of tinkering right now on video so that you can see kind of how the back end is going to look, and it won't be permanent. The neat thing is that I can, of course, pop the ship apart and just work on the part that I need to and be able to turn it and all of that, and that's going to make it much easier to build. So yeah, all right. I'm gonna build a little bit, and you guys can watch. So. There is the beginning of how the back end is going to look. And the connection that ended up going here ended up being far smoother and cleaner than I had ever hoped it would be. And there's a bit of just plain and simple Lego system magic. And those of you who have seen the Toys That Made Us series, there was that one guy who kept talking about the system, which is how, you know, the height of things, the angle of things, how, you know, when you've got the parts that have like a pinhole in the middle, exactly how far is it from the bottom so that a certain number of Legos stacked are the same as the length of a Lego. It's a lot of geometry, and it's absolutely amazing how they did it. And this is an example of where that came together to do something that is just absolutely baffling. And that is this connection right here where the window is connected to this jumper plate, because there is no less than 3 different half brick offsets at a 45-degree angle all coming together perfectly. So this part of the ship is an even width. It's the back end that those windows are originally attached to, and it's an even width. This section of the ship, where the window is then connecting, is one of the sections that's offset by half a brick. And so it's an odd number of bricks wide. It's then connected to a jumper plate, so that's the pin off, or the stud offset to the center. And then it's connecting on the window not to the hole. I don't know how well that's going to show up. There we go. Not to what would normally be where the stud would go in. It's on that peg, because the jumper plate has a hollow stud. So the peg is going in there. So it's offset to where it's connected to the window. It's on a jumper plate on a section of the ship that is offset by half a brick from where it all started. And it all fits perfectly so that the window lines up exactly with this gap here. So there ends up being almost no gap between this brick and that window. And that is actually a cannon port right there. And the fact that it lined up that perfectly is amazing. And it then also will then line up perfectly with the stuff that's going on above it. And yeah, that's the kind of things you discover when you tinker with something that's got this many angles and shapes and weird things all coming together. And the fact that it works is, like I said, straight up Lego system magic. This is how big this is going to end up being. You're supposed to be over here. I ran out of the windows, so I will need to acquire more of those. But that is how big the rear gallery is going to be. I don't know if that's the coloring it will be yet, but that is the height and the size. This will then end up kind of being tapered up to here, and won't be a whole lot higher than that. There will just be there'll be a top deck and then on a railing, but it'll kind of slope down until it reaches the top of this deck, which will be here. So yeah, it's going to be a very tall ship. This would be the height that would be at. So again, if you can imagine the scale that this thing is on, it's big. But I really don't know how it's gonna look. If this tapers too much, is gonna be too narrow here. If I need to widen the whole ship, I kind of don't wanna, but if I have to, I will. it wouldn't actually be that difficult to just split the thing down the seam and widen it, but by the time I know whether I need to, it means I would need to disassemble pretty much the whole thing. But that is kind of how the tinkering works. I think it's a good width, but I won't know until I build it. So that's as far as I can really go right now because of lack of parts. I need to wait on the ribbing so I can do the rest and the wall plate so I can do all of that. I will probably need to order a whole bunch more of these, the little windows, because they go in the cannon ports and support the little flag that is the gun port. So I don't know how many I have, but I will probably need to order a bunch more. But I'm fairly certain I don't have 56 of them, which is how many I'm going to need. Anyway, I think that's enough for now. Thank you for watching.